John F. Kennedy International Airport does not slow down for anyone. It is a machine, massive and different, perpetually grinding forward on the momentum of 10,000 separate urgencies. Departure boards flicker with the restless energy of destinations being born and erased every few minutes. Announcements overlap in three languages, each one cutting across the other, with the cheerful indifference of a system that was never designed for human comfort, only human movement. Rolling suitcases clatter across polished floors, worn smooth by millions of passing feet. Families argue over gate numbers in the particular sharp tone that emerges when exhaustion and anxiety share the same body. Business travelers move in straight, deliberate lines, earbuds sealed in eyes tracking the middle distance. The practiced efficiency of people who have done this so many times that the airport has become nothing more than a corridor between one obligation and the next. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, with a gray Atlantic sky pressing flat and heavy against the terminal windows and the first real bite of winter threading itself through the recycled air, 15-year-old Jordan Ellis sat alone in the departure lounge at Gate B-17 and drew pictures of strangers. He had a sketchbook, black cover well worn at the corners, the spiral binding slightly bent from being stuffed into his backpack more times than it was designed to withstand. His pencil moved slowly and deliberately across the page, with the patience of someone who understood at 15 that the best things could not be rushed, and that rushing them produced something technically correct, but emotionally empty. He was working on a woman across the lounge, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up into silver hair that had been allowed to go silver without apology. Her left hand wrapped around a paper coffee cup she had clearly forgotten was empty, the small, unconscious gesture of someone seeking comfort from a vessel that had nothing left to give. There was something in the set of her jaw, the slight forward lean of her shoulders toward the departure board, that told Jordan she was waiting for news she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to receive. He captured it without judgment. That was the thing about drawing people honestly. You couldn't lie on the page. The pencil always found the truth underneath the performance, the real thing beneath the constructed surface. It was the quality his art teacher had called observational precision, and his father had called something more straightforward, the ability to see people as they actually were, instead of as they wanted to be seen. Jordan Ellis was 15 years old, 5'8", and built with the lean, unhurried physicality of a boy who had grown 3 inches in the past year and hadn't quite finished deciding what kind of man his body was going to become. His hoodie was gray and faded in the specific way that comes from years of actual use, the fabric soft from washing and rewashing, the color bleached by 100 cycles into something gentler than its original shade. It was not the distressed gray that fashion designers charge $400 to replicate. It was simply a hoodie that had been worn by someone who wore his clothes until they became part of him. His jeans were clean but worn at the right knee. His sneakers were comfortable and scuffed at the toe, in the way of shoes that had been walked in rather than displayed. His only luggage was a single black nylon backpack. Inside it, the sketchbook, a laptop, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, a phone charger, and a paperback biography of Frederick Douglass that his father had given him on his last birthday. Nathan had tucked a handwritten note inside the front cover. It read in his father's precise architectural handwriting, "Read this when the world stops making sense." Jordan had started the book twice. He had a feeling today might be the day he finally finished it. He was flying alone to Chicago to meet his father, Nathan Ellis, who had been out there for 4 days managing what Nathan described, with a deliberate understatement he applied to most professional crises, as a situation at the firm's Midwest office. The original arrangement had been for Jordan to spend the week at his aunt's apartment in Brooklyn while Nathan was away. But Nathan had called 2 days ago, his voice carrying the specific, tightly controlled tension of a man who had been in consecutive high-stakes meetings for 72 hours and missed his son more than the calendar had left him room to acknowledge, and told Jordan to pack a bag. Come to Chicago. They would have the weekend. Jordan had said yes before his father reached the end of the sentence. The ticket Nathan booked was a first-class seat on Trans-Aero Flight 112, departing JFK at 4:15 in the afternoon and arriving at Chicago O'Hare at 6:30. Seat 2A window. Nathan Ellis was the founder and chief executive officer of Fortis Data Shield, a cybersecurity infrastructure company that had grown over 11 years from a 3-person operation working out of a rented room in an Evanston office park into one of the most consequential digital security firms in the country. Fortis Data Shield did not make consumer software. It did not build apps or sell antivirus subscriptions to home users. It built the invisible architecture, the deep structural skeleton of encrypted systems that kept major financial institutions, federal government contractors, and global corporations safe from the kind of catastrophic data breaches that could collapse stock prices and end careers within the same afternoon. Nathan had built it from nothing. From considerably less than nothing, actually. From a two-bedroom apartment in Chicago's South Side, where winter came through the walls regardless of what the landlord said about insulation. From a partial scholarship to a state university, and 3 jobs worked simultaneously to cover what the scholarship didn't reach. From a ferocious, patient, completely unshakable conviction that the world would eventually have to acknowledge what he was capable of if he simply refused absolutely and permanently to stop. Fortis Data Shield spent approximately $4 million a year on corporate travel. TransAero was the preferred carrier. Nathan held a platinum account with the airline, and the kind of relationship with TransAero's executive leadership that develops naturally when one company spends $4 million a year without complaint, and the other company's most sensitive passenger data lives inside the first company's encrypted servers. None of that was visible on his son. Jordan closed the sketchbook when the boarding announcement came for TransAero Flight 112 first class and priority passengers. He capped his pencil, tucked the sketchbook into the front pocket of his backpack, and stood up. He joined the priority lane at gate B17, pulling up his boarding pass on his phone as he walked. The priority lane felt different from the rest of the terminal. Quieter in a way that had nothing to do with decibels and everything to do with the specific atmospheric pressure of entitlement. The passengers ahead of Jordan were older almost uniformly and dressed in the particular uniform of American corporate achievement. Tailored blazers in dark wool, overcoats in camel and charcoal, carry-ons in matte black or cognac leather, the kind of luggage that communicates net worth without saying a word. The quiet, settled confidence of people who had been told reliably and repeatedly over the course of their entire adult lives that they deserved the good seats, and who had long since stopped needing that confirmation because it had become invisible to them like oxygen. Jordan took his place at the back of the line. The man directly ahead of him did not acknowledge his presence. The woman 2 positions ahead glanced back, registered Jordan, and turned forward again, with an expression that was not quite a frown, but lived in that general neighborhood. Jordan noticed. He noticed everything. He simply chose, as he almost always did, not to react to things that hadn't yet become problems. Garrett Sykes was this gate agent working podium 2. He was a man in his mid-40s with thinning brown hair combed carefully to one side, and the specific brand of institutional authority that derives not from genuine power, but from proximity to it. The airline blazer with the logo embroidered on the breast pocket, the lanyard with the laminated access badge, the scanner and the keyboard, and the ability to say yes or no to people who very much needed to board a plane. Garrett had worked gates at JFK for 11 years. He believed with the quiet confidence of long practice that he was good at reading a boarding line, that he could tell within approximately 3 seconds of looking at a person whether they were where they were supposed to be. When the business traveler 2 spots ahead of Jordan reached the podium, Garrett greeted him by his last name and asked whether he wanted his usual aisle upgrade noted in the system. When the woman in the camel overcoat stepped forward, Garrett smiled warmly and wished her a smooth connection in Chicago. When Jordan stepped up to the podium and extended his phone with the boarding pass displayed on the screen, Garrett Sykes looked up from his keyboard, looked at Jordan, and said nothing for a full 3 seconds. Then, without greeting Jordan, without making eye contact, without any acknowledgement that Jordan had presented himself at the podium in the correct lane with his boarding pass ready, Garrett turned to the man standing directly behind Jordan in the line, a heavy-set man in his late 50s with a rolling carry-on and a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal tucked under his arm. "Sir," Garrett said pleasantly, "do you need any assistance today? We can move you through quickly if you have a connection." The man blinked with the mild surprise of someone who had not expected to be addressed. "Oh no, I'm fine, thank you." Garrett turned back to his screen. Jordan stood at the podium with his phone still extended and his boarding pass still displayed. He did not lower his arm. He did not make a sound. He waited with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that patience is not submission and that silence is not agreement. After a moment, Garrett reached across and pressed the scanner against Jordan's phone without making eye contact. The machine produced its confirmation tone. The screen illuminated green. Seat 2A, TransAero Flight 112, first class. Jordan Ellis. Garrett stared at the screen. He looked at Jordan. He looked at the screen again with the specific expression of a man who had expected the system to validate his assumption and was processing with visible displeasure the fact that it had not. "This seat is in the first-class cabin," Garrett said. "Yes, sir," Jordan said. "Are you traveling with an adult today?" "No, I'm traveling alone. My father booked the ticket." Garrett's fingers moved over his keyboard with the slightly too deliberate motion of someone searching for a discrepancy that the data was stubbornly declining to provide. The ticket was valid, fully paid, registered to an active Platinum corporate account with a 4-year history of on-time payments. There was nothing to find, and both of them, on some level, understood that. With the particular stiffness of a man performing a decision he could not justify but was not prepared to reverse, Garrett printed a paper boarding stub and pushed it across the counter without a word. Jordan picked it up. He said, "Thank you." Garrett did not respond. Jordan walked down the jet bridge. The first-class cabin of a Trans-Aero wide-body aircraft is a genuinely beautiful space. Wide leather pods arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each one equipped with a lay-flat mechanism, a privacy divider, a generous personal screen, and the kind of soft amber ambient lighting that makes the entire cabin feel like a place slightly removed from the ordinary abrasive friction of the world beyond the aircraft door. The air carries a warmth with something faintly citrus in it, something deliberate and carefully maintained. The flight attendants move through the space with the practiced balletic efficiency of people who have learned that in this particular environment, grace is not an affectation, but a professional requirement. Jordan found seat 2A without difficulty. It was a window seat near the front of the cabin, the view out the oval window showing the gray October tarmac and the flat industrial geometry of the airfield spreading out toward the distant boundary fence. He stowed his backpack under the footrest, settled into the wide leather seat, and sat for a moment looking out at the ground crew below. Baggage handlers in orange safety vests moved between vehicles with the brisk, purposeful economy of people whose work existed on a clock that did not accommodate hesitation. A fuel truck idled alongside the starboard wing. A ground coordinator in a yellow jacket spoke into a radio with one hand raised. Jordan watched them work for a while. Then he opened his sketchbook and started a new page. For approximately 8 minutes, the world was quiet and the situation was ordinary. And the only thing happening in seat 2A was a 15-year-old drawing the curve of the terminal roof visible through the window. Then the boarding flow increased. The cabin began to fill with the particular density of a space receiving its intended occupants. The ambient scent changed as passengers arrived, cologne layered over cologne, the faint metallic edge of expensive leather goods, the soft, rhythmic percussion of overhead bins being opened and loaded and closed. Flight attendants circulated through the aisle with small silver trays bearing champagne flutes and orange juice, greeting each arriving passenger by name, where they could with warm, attentive efficiency, where they couldn't. Jordan was looking out the window with his pencil moving across the sketchbook page when the shadow of someone stopping in the aisle fell across the row beside him. He looked up. Clifford Ashby was 58 years old and presented himself to the world in the manner of a man who had spent every one of those 58 years ensuring that everyone within his immediate radius understood without being told directly the precise magnitude of his net worth and the social altitude it implied. His suit was charcoal and bespoke the construction so precise that it moved with him rather than on him, the kind of tailoring that costs more than many people's monthly take-home pay and is designed specifically to communicate that fact to anyone who knows how to read it. His shirt was white and without a single crease. His tie was deep burgundy silk with a tight half-Windsor knot. On his left wrist, a Rolex Submariner in stainless steel and black ceramic caught the cabin light and distributed it back into the space with the quiet arrogance of an object that had never once been asked to justify its own price. His face was broad and heavy-jawed, carrying in its set lines and angles the permanent expression of a man who had arrived somewhere in his middle years at the conclusion that disappointment in other people was simply the natural condition of being more capable than them. It was not an angry face. It was something more settled and in some ways worse than anger. It was the face of a man who had stopped being surprised by inadequacy. Clifford Ashby was a senior partner at Meridian Capital, a private equity and high-frequency algorithmic trading firm headquartered in a tower in Midtown Manhattan. He managed a portfolio measured comfortably in the hundreds of millions. He flew first class as a matter of routine the way other people drove to work. He held platinum status with Transaero and had occupied seat 2B on this specific JFK to O'Hare route 17 times in the preceding 2 years. He looked at the seat number on his ticket. He looked at Jordan. He looked at the ticket number again. He did not speak to Jordan. He did not ask a question or extend any form of direct communication toward the 15-year-old occupying the seat beside his. He raised one hand and snapped his fingers in the direction of the forward galley. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the boarding cabin with the crisp, percussive authority of a gesture that had been practiced over decades until it had become entirely automatic. Pamela Greer was Transaero's lead purser for the first-class cabin on Flight 112. She had held this position for 14 years on this route and had earned it through a decade and a half of disciplined, attentive, genuinely skilled service. She was good at her job in the specific way that people are good at jobs they have given themselves to completely. And her job at its essential core was this: keep the people in this cabin comfortable, keep the atmosphere undisturbed, and ensure that the experience of flying first class on Transaero felt like something that justified its cost. She appeared at Clifford's side within seconds of the finger-snap warm smile, deployed posture precisely attentive. "Mr. Ashby, welcome back. Can I start you with your usual before we push back? We have the—" Clifford did not look at her. He pointed one manicured finger directly at Jordan. "Pamela," he said, "there has been a mistake." Pamela Greer followed the line of that pointing finger. She looked at Jordan Ellis. She took in the gray hoodie, the sketchbook, the worn backpack, the youth, the face. Something shifted in her expression in the way that things shift when a decision is made below the level of conscious thought, a small interior recalibration that happened beneath the surface of her professional composure, but changed everything above it. The smile remained in place, held by muscle memory and 14 years of training. But the warmth that had been behind it a moment before cooled by several degrees. "I apologize, Mr. Ashby," she said, the words smooth and automatic. "Let me sort this out immediately." She turned to Jordan. Her voice maintained its professional register, but carried beneath it the unmistakable undertone of authority being asserted over someone assumed without examination to have no standing to resist it. "Excuse me, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." Jordan set his pencil down on the armrest. He looked at Pamela with a steadiness that was neither aggressive nor apologetic. "Of course." He held up his phone. Pamela did not look at the screen. "A paper ticket, please. Digital screenshots can be altered." Jordan reached into the front zip pocket of his backpack and produced the boarding stub Garrett had printed at the podium. He handed it across. Pamela took it. She looked at it. "Jordan Ellis, Seat 2A, First Class, Transaero Flight 112. Registered to Fortis Data Shield Corporate Platinum account." She looked at Jordan. She looked back at the ticket. "Where did you obtain this?" she asked. "My father booked it," Jordan said. "It's on his corporate account. The company is called Fortis Data Shield." The name produced no visible recognition. If it meant anything to her, her face gave nothing away. Clifford made a sound in his throat, the sound of a man who has already determined the conclusion and finds the ongoing process of arriving at it tedious. He looked at Jordan with the open, unhurried assessment of someone examining an object that had been placed in the wrong display case. "His father," he said, the two words loaded with the specific weight of disbelief deployed as a weapon. "Look at him, Pamela. He wandered in from general boarding. This is not a security issue. It is an embarrassment to the airline." Jordan's hand closed around the armrest. His face did not change. "I have a valid ticket," he said. His voice was quiet and level and entirely controlled. "My name is on it." "I'm not going to debate this with you," Pamela said, the professional surface thinning at its edges. "There are established protocols for unaccompanied minors traveling on upgraded or standby reservations. In this situation, clearly—" "I'm not on standby," Jordan said, "and I'm not debating. I'm telling you a fact." The steadiness was what stopped her. She had prepared herself in the few seconds between Clifford's gesture in this moment for tears or defiance, or the frightened compliance of a child who understood he was outmatched by adults with institutional authority behind them. She had not been prepared for this. A 15-year-old who held her gaze with the settled, unafraid directness of someone who knew precisely what he was entitled to and had made a decision somewhere before this conversation began, that he was not going to be argued out of it. Clifford leaned slightly toward Pamela. He lowered his voice, but not by enough. The passengers in the surrounding rows heard him clearly. I am not sitting beside someone of his demographic for the duration of an interstate flight. I have no idea how he cleared the gate agent, but I will not tolerate this degree of operational negligence from this airline. If this situation is not resolved in the next 60 seconds, I am calling Douglas Whitfield's office directly. The words landed in the cabin air and stayed there. Several passengers in the nearby rows had stopped what they were doing. Tablets lowered, novels held still. A champagne glass paused halfway to a mouth. The entire immediate section of the first-class cabin had gone quiet, with the specific collective quality of people who are watching something they recognize as wrong and have decided each of them individually that it is not their problem. And then Jordan Ellis did something that no one in the first-class cabin of Transaero Flight 112 had expected. He looked directly at Pamela Greer. In a voice that was entirely almost preternaturally calm, he said, I'm going to need your full name and your employee badge number, ma'am. Please. Pamela blinked. I'm sorry. Your full name, Jordan said again, without raising his voice by a single degree, and your badge number. I would like both of those things. The cabin went to a different quality of silence. Not the silence of people watching something uncomfortable. The silence of people who have just seen something they did not anticipate and are recalibrating. Pamela Greer had worked first-class aviation for 14 years. She had managed intoxicated executives and senators who felt their office entitled them to behavior that would not have been accepted anywhere outside of their own offices. She had de-escalated situations that could have generated federal incident reports. She had over 14 years developed what she genuinely believed was an unshakable professional composure. She had never been asked for her badge number by a 15-year-old in a gray hoodie who was looking at her with the specific focused calm of someone building a record. She did not answer him. In seat 3F3 rows behind the confrontation, a woman named Claire Mosswood had been watching since the moment Clifford Ashby snapped his fingers. Claire was 43 years old, a senior investigative journalist with the Associated Press, returning to the Chicago Bureau after covering a cybersecurity infrastructure conference in New York. She had spent 20 years learning to recognize the exact moment when something that appeared ordinary crossed the threshold into something that mattered. It was not always a dramatic moment. Sometimes it was a gesture. Sometimes it was the absence of one. Sometimes it was the particular quality of a silence. This was that moment. She had been recording on her phone since Jordan said he needed Pamela's badge number. The camera was angled through the gap between her seat back and the divider panel, capturing the posture and expressions and spatial arrangement of power in that small, expensive, carefully curated space. She did not move. She did not speak. She held the phone steady and let the footage accumulate. Beverly Drummond arrived at the aircraft 8 minutes after Pamela's call to the operations desk. Beverly was Transaero's operations manager for Terminal 4, and her entire professional identity had been constructed over 16 years around the concept of protocol. She moved through the airport with the specific authority of someone who had learned that institutional power was most effective when it arrived without warmth, without hesitation, and without any signal that negotiation was available. She was accompanied by 2 security officers in neon yellow vests, both broad-shouldered, both wearing the practiced neutral expression of men who had been dispatched to resolve a situation and had been given no details beyond that instruction. Beverly walked down the aisle of the first-class cabin to row 2 and looked at Jordan with the flat administrative gaze of someone processing a logistical obstruction. "Young man," she said, "collect your belongings and exit the aircraft." "Ma'am," Jordan said, "my ticket is valid. It was scanned at the gate. The system confirmed the seat. You are creating a disturbance on federal property. If you do not gather your belongings and step off this aircraft voluntarily, these officers will assist your removal and you will be held for questioning." The word held arrived in the pressurized cabin air with the specific gravity that certain words carry when they are directed at a young black man in America, and everyone in the room understands on some level what they actually mean. Jordan felt it land. He was 15 years old and alone and surrounded by adults who had collectively decided the outcome of this situation before a single word of it had been spoken. He understood with a clarity that was simultaneously beyond his years and entirely consistent with his years of experience moving through the world in his body, that the correct response in this moment was not the one his anger was proposing. The correct response was the one that kept him physically safe, kept his dignity intact, and gave them nothing they could use against him later. He reached under the footrest. He picked up his backpack. His hands were steady. He stood. He looked at Beverly Drummond and said without heat, without volume, with the precise weight of a statement rather than an appeal, "This is wrong, and you know it." Beverly did not respond. Jordan stepped into the aisle. The two security officers positioned themselves on either side of him with the practiced efficiency of men performing a routine they had performed before. The first-class cabin watched in the silence of people who had made their individual calculations and arrived each of them at the conclusion that this was not theirs to carry. And then at the precise point in the aisle where row 2 ended and row 3 began, Jordan stopped walking. He turned his head. He looked at Clifford Ashby directly with the full, unmediated attention of someone who had decided that this moment would be recorded in his own memory with complete accuracy and that the man across the armrest would know it. Clifford Ashby was seated now, his champagne glass resting on the armrest, his posture carrying the settled ease of a man who had gotten what he came to get. He met Jordan's gaze for approximately 1 second. Then he looked away, down at the glass, toward the window. At a fixed point somewhere in the middle distance that was not Jordan's face. Jordan watched him look away. Then Jordan turned and walked off the plane. The jet bridge was long and upward sloping and filled with the mechanical hum of climate systems working against the October cold outside. Jordan walked up its length with the security officers behind him, and with each step the full accumulated weight of what had just happened settled further into his body. Not the anger, although the anger was present and he knew exactly what it was and had been taught how to carry it without letting it carry him. What settled now was something heavier and quieter and older than anger. The specific gravity of being told without a single direct word by an entire room of adults who should have known better, and on some level did know better, that the space you had every legal and ethical and human right to occupy was not yours. He had been in spaces like this before. Not with this many witnesses, not with this specific configuration of institutional force arranged against him. But the geometry of it was familiar. The looks that moved over you like you were an equation already solved before the problem had been fully read. The way certain people's assumptions organized themselves into a verdict before the evidence had been presented. He had always gotten through it the way his father had taught him. Head up, voice steady, give them nothing they can use, document everything. The security officers left him at the departure lounge at gate B-17 without explanation and walked back toward the jet bridge without looking at him. The lounge was mostly empty, the boarding process long concluded. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the aircraft was still visible, connected to the terminal by the extended jet bridge, the ground crew moving around the fuselage in the fading gray afternoon light. Jordan sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs that line airport terminal walls. The chairs designed specifically to communicate through their discomfort that this space was built for passing through rather than remaining in. He took one slow breath. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the sketchbook. He turned to a fresh page. He picked up his pencil and began to draw the shape of Clifford Ashby's face from the image held precisely in his memory. The jaw, the heavy brow, the lines around the mouth, the expression that had been in his eyes in the single second before he had looked away. Jordan drew it carefully and honestly, without exaggeration and without cruelty. He was not trying to make Clifford Ashby look like a monster. Monsters were easy, and they were also dishonest. What Jordan was trying to capture was something harder and more specific. The face of a man who had made choices that had revealed him completely and did not yet understand what that revelation was going to cost. He was halfway through the drawing of Clifford's jaw when his phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Unknown number. Chicago area code. He answered. Jordan. A woman's voice. Measured and professional, but carrying underneath it a controlled urgency, something close to anger on his behalf, carefully managed. My name is Claire Mosswood. I'm a journalist with the Associated Press. I was sitting in seat 3F on flight 112. Jordan looked up from the sketchbook. 40 feet away across the departure lounge, a woman in a dark blazer stood with her phone pressed to her ear, looking directly at him. I filmed all of it, Claire said. From the moment you asked for her badge number to the moment they walked you out. I have 6 minutes and 14 seconds of clear footage. Jordan said nothing. He waited. I will not publish a single frame of it without your permission, Claire continued. That is not a negotiation, and it is not a condition. It is a promise. A brief pause. But I need you to hear something clearly, and I need you to hear it right now. Another pause shorter. What was done to you on that aircraft was wrong. What you did, the way you conducted yourself through every second of it, I have been covering stories in this country for 20 years. I have watched people in impossible situations make decisions under pressure. What I watched you do in that cabin is something I have not seen in a long time. Jordan looked at her across the distance of the lounge. You are 15 years old, Claire said. You were completely alone in there. Every adult in that cabin had institutional authority or social leverage or both, and they could not break you. Jordan Ellis sat in the hard plastic terminal chair with the sketchbook open in his lap and the pencil in his hand, and looked at the woman standing 40 feet away in the fading October light of a terminal that did not slow down for anyone. He thought about his father. He thought about the ticket registered to a platinum account that moved $4 million a year through this airline. He thought about Clifford Ashby's eyes in the precise moment before they cut away from his. He thought about the note inside the front cover of the Frederick Douglass biography in his backpack. Read this when the world stops making sense. He thought about the fact that his father had told him more than once in more than one context that the most important thing a person could do in a situation designed to diminish them was refuse absolutely and without performance to be diminished. Then Jordan Ellis nodded his head, slowly, once, with the full weight of a considered decision behind it. And Claire Mosswood lowered her phone, and across 40 feet of polished terminal floor, in the gray October quiet of Gate B-17 at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The two of them arrived at a complete mutual understanding without another word being necessary. Behind them, through the thick terminal glass, the aircraft sat motionless at the end of the jet bridge. It would not stay motionless for long. Nathan Ellis did not run. Men who had built what he had built did not need to run. They had learned through years of boardrooms and contract negotiations and moments where the margin between success and failure was measured in seconds, and the only thing that mattered was how you carried yourself under the pressure of those seconds, that speed was not the same thing as urgency, that the most powerful projection a man could make in a genuine crisis was not panic, not visible distress, not the signaling of emotion that the situation warranted. It was the absolute, unshakable, fully inhabited certainty that the outcome was already determined, and that the only remaining variable was how long it would take everyone else in the situation to understand that. Nathan walked, long strides, deliberate, spaced with the unhurried confidence of a man who had learned that a crowd parts more reliably for certainty than for speed. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the jacket cut close in the way of clothes made specifically for the body wearing them. His shirt was open at the collar in the way of a man who had long since stopped performing formality for audiences that hadn't earned it. He carried his phone and nothing else. His face was controlled in the specific way that faces are controlled when the emotion underneath them is genuine and significant and is being converted in real time from something that could damage into something that could be used. He had landed at JFK Terminal 4:45 minutes ago. The reason Nathan Ellis was at JFK at all, rather than at O'Hare waiting for his son to arrive, required a brief explanation. His commercial return flight from Chicago to New York had been canceled 2 days earlier due to a significant weather system moving through the Great Lakes region. The cancellation had presented Nathan with a logistical fork. He could rebook on a later commercial flight and return to New York as originally scheduled. Or he could use his firm's standing charter arrangement to fly back and use the flexibility of that option to do something he had been thinking about since the moment Jordan said yes on the phone. He could be at JFK when Jordan arrived at the gate. He could walk onto the plane with his son. It had seemed 2 days ago like a small and uncomplicated thing. A father surprising his son. The kind of gesture that required no explanation. So Nathan had taken the charter from Chicago to JFK, landed 45 minutes ago, and was walking through Terminal 4 toward Gate B-17 with the specific anticipatory lightness of a man who had been in back-to-back professional crises for 4 days and was 20 minutes away from seeing his son. Instead, he had read a text message. "Dad, they took me off the plane. My ticket is real. They wouldn't look at it. Please come to B-17. Nathan read the message twice. He read it a second time, not because the first reading had been unclear, but because the first reading had produced a response in him that he needed to manage before he was useful to anyone. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and started walking. As he moved through the concourse, he pulled the phone back out and made a call. Not to Transaero's customer service line, not to the airport's passenger relations office. He called Douglas Whitfield directly. Douglas was the chief executive officer of Transaero Airlines, a man Nathan had known professionally for 6 years through the Platinum corporate account, and more recently through the kind of direct working relationship that develops when one company's most sensitive operational data lives inside another company's encrypted infrastructure. The line connected on the second ring. Nathan, Douglas's voice carried the easy tone of a man expecting a routine professional call. Good to hear from you. If this is about the Q4 infrastructure review timeline, I was going to reach out this week about Douglas, Nathan said, and the single word delivered with the specific temperature of someone who had fully processed something devastating and was now operating on the far side of that processing, stopped Douglas Whitfield mid-sentence. I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you to not speak until I finish. Of course, Douglas said. His voice had already changed. I am walking through Terminal 4 at JFK right now. Approximately 30 minutes ago, your lead purser and your operations manager removed my 15-year-old son from his first-class seat on Transaero Flight 112. They accused him of ticket fraud. They threatened him with detention. They used your airport security personnel to physically escort a minor off a fully boarded aircraft because a passenger in the adjacent seat objected to his presence. Nathan's voice did not rise. It did not acquire heat. It remained level and precise and quiet in the way that things are quiet when they have become maximally serious. My son is 15 years old. He was alone. His ticket was valid. It was registered to my Platinum corporate account. And your staff removed him from a seat he had every right to occupy because he is a young black boy wearing a hoodie and a man in a bespoke suit decided that was sufficient grounds for removal. The silence on the line lasted several seconds. My God, Douglas said. Nathan, are you absolutely certain? My son texted me from the departure lounge. I am looking at the gate from 30 meters away. I am entirely certain. A brief pause. I should also tell you that there is an investigative journalist from the Associated Press who was seated 3 rows behind the incident. She filmed the entire thing. She has already contacted my son directly. She is currently with him in the departure lounge. There was a longer silence. Douglas Whitfield had spent 30 years in commercial aviation and had developed through that experience a very precise internal calibration for the magnitude of operational disasters. What Nathan had just described was not a service complaint. It was not a passenger relations issue. It was the kind of event that moved stock prices and ended careers and generated congressional inquiries, and it was compounded in this specific case by the fact that the father of the removed child was the chief executive of the company whose encrypted servers contained Transaero's most sensitive passenger data infrastructure. Tell me what you need, Douglas said. The easiness was entirely gone from his voice. Flight 112, Nathan said. What is its current position? The sound of rapid keyboard input. It pushed back from the gate 11 minutes ago. It's currently holding in the taxi queue for runway 4 left. It has not reached the hold short line. I need it back at gate B17, E1. A sharp intake of breath. Nathan, it's fully loaded and fueled. It's in the active taxi queue. The FAA ground movement protocols for recalling a... I understand the protocols, Douglas. The quiet in Nathan's voice was absolute. Not the quiet of someone who lacked feeling, but the quiet of someone whose feeling had been converted entirely into precision. My son's seat was taken from him by your staff on false pretenses. I intend to put him back in it. If that aircraft reaches the runway before I can accomplish that, I will speak to your board of directors before the close of business today about whether Fortis Data Shield's contract with Transaero reflects the values of an organization we are prepared to continue protecting. He paused. I don't want that conversation, Douglas. I suspect you don't want it either. So I am asking you one more time. Get the plane back to the gate. 4 seconds of silence. I'm calling JFK Tower operations right now, Douglas said. Nathan ended the call. He rounded the final bend of the concourse and saw gate B17. The departure lounge was largely empty, the boarding long concluded. The gate podium was staffed by a single agent leaning against the counter with the relaxed posture of someone who believed the demanding portion of their shift was behind them. And there against the window wall in a row of hard plastic chairs, alone in the specific way that is different from simply being by oneself, was Jordan. He was sitting with his sketchbook open in his lap and his pencil moving across the page, his backpack on the floor beside his chair. His posture was straight. He had not collapsed inward. He had not made himself small. He sat with his spine upright and his shoulders back, and drew, which was what he had done since he was 7 years old when the world presented him with something he needed to process from the outside rather than the inside. A woman in a dark blazer sat 2 chairs away from Jordan, speaking quietly into her phone. She looked up when Nathan came through the entrance to the lounge. Their eyes met briefly. She gave him a small, specific nod. The nod of someone who understood that the situation was about to enter a new phase, and that her role in this particular moment was to make space for it. Nathan walked to his son. He placed his hand on Jordan's shoulder. Jordan looked up. His eyes were dry. Whatever had happened in the minutes before his father arrived, the visible portion of it was finished. But Nathan saw the thing underneath the composure, the particular shadow that lives in a young person's face when the world has administered something they were not old enough to have fully absorbed yet. Nathan had seen that shadow in other faces. He had seen it in mirrors a long time ago, in circumstances that were not as different from these as the intervening decades of success might have suggested. "Dad," Jordan said, "I'm here." Nathan sat down beside his son, not across from him. Beside him in the adjacent chair, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. "Are you hurt? Did anyone put their hands on you?" "No," Jordan said. The security guys stood close. "They didn't touch me. I walked off on my own." Nathan nodded. He looked at his son for a long, careful moment, the inventory that fathers take when they are checking for damage that doesn't always present on the surface. "Tell me what happened," Nathan said. "Everything, in the order it happened," Jordan told him. He reported it the way Nathan had taught him to report things, with the precise sequential clarity of someone who understood that accurate testimony was a form of power. He described Garrett at the podium, the 3-second pause the question directed at the man behind him. He described seat 2A and the 8 quiet minutes before Clifford Ashby's shadow fell across the row. He described the finger snap, the exact words Pamela Greer had used the paper ticket demand. He described Beverly Drummond and the security officers and the specific weight the word held had carried in the pressurized air of the cabin. He described asking for the badge number. He described walking out with his back straight. And he described the moment in the aisle at the break between row 2 and row 3 when he had stopped and turned and looked at Clifford Ashby, and Clifford Ashby had looked somewhere else first. Nathan listened without interrupting. He did not shake his head or exhale or make any of the small sounds of outrage that the account warranted. He simply listened with the complete, undivided attention that had always been one of his most important qualities as a father. The ability to be entirely present in what his son was saying in a way that made Jordan feel that nothing in the world was more important than what he was telling him. When Jordan finished, Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you want to handle this?" Jordan looked at his father. It was not the question Jordan had expected. It was not the question most fathers would have asked at this moment. Most fathers, having heard what Jordan had just described, would already be at the gate podium, already in motion, already occupying the space between their son and the people who had harmed him, doing what fathers do, which is take over. Nathan sat still and asked his son what he wanted. Jordan was quiet for several seconds. He looked out the window at the aircraft still visible on the tarmac, its running lights beginning to matter in the thickening gray of the late afternoon. Then he stood up. "I want to talk to them first," he said. "By myself." Nathan looked at his son with an expression that held something brief and deep. "All right," he said. Jordan picked up his backpack. He walked across the lounge to the gate podium where Garrett Sykes was standing, and Beverly Drummond had recently returned from the jet bridge. The two of them were engaged in the low, easy conversation of people who believe the difficult portion of a situation has been adequately resolved. Nathan did not move from the chair. He put his hands in his pockets and watched. Garrett saw Jordan coming and his posture changed. Beverly turned and crossed her arms with the preparatory movement of someone expecting a resumption of an argument she had already won. Jordan stopped in front of Beverly. He looked at her directly. "Ma'am," he said, "I am formally requesting a written statement explaining the specific grounds on which I was removed from Transaero Flight 112. I would like the statement to include the full names of all personnel involved in the removal decision, and I would like it signed. Beverly blinked. That is not a document that we provide. I understand you may choose not to provide it, Jordan said without pause and without heat. I want to establish clearly in front of this gentleman, a brief glance at Garrett, that you are declining my formal request for written documentation of the reasons for my removal from a flight on which I held a valid ticket. Beverly's mouth opened, then closed. Garrett looked at the floor. Beverly said, this matter has been handled appropriately. If you have further concerns, TransAero's customer relations line. Thank you, Jordan said. That's all I needed. He turned and walked back to his father. Nathan Ellis had spent 11 years building a company from the first principles up, and in the course of that work, he had conducted hundreds of interviews, assessed thousands of people under various conditions of pressure and clarity, and developed what he believed was a reliable internal instrument for measuring the quality of someone's mind and action. He had just watched his 15-year-old son alone without coaching or preparation walk to a gate podium and build a documented record of a declined formal request in front of a witness using nothing but precise language and absolute composure. He had never done anything of that quality at 15. He was not certain he had done it at 25. He said nothing when Jordan returned. He placed his hand briefly on the back of Jordan's neck, the gesture that had meant since Jordan was 7 years old, the compressed version of everything that didn't fit in words. Then Nathan turned toward the window. On the tarmac in the middle distance, the running lights of Flight 112 were motionless in the taxi queue. He pulled out his phone. He called Douglas Whitfield back. Douglas answered before the first ring completed. Nathan, Tower Operations has received the hold order. The aircraft is being instructed to hold position. Ground crew is already moving toward the aircraft. Time to gate. 12 to 15 minutes. They're moving. Good. A pause. Douglas, I need the full names and employee numbers of every TransAero staff member involved in this incident before that aircraft docks. The gate agent, the lead purser, the operations manager. You'll have them. Nathan, I want you to know that what happened to your son today is not what I need to know, Nathan said quietly, is what TransAero does in the next hour. That will tell me everything I need to know about what this airline is. He ended the call. On the tarmac below, the running lights of Flight 112 were still. Inside the first-class cabin of that motionless aircraft, Clifford Ashby had checked his Rolex 4 times in the last 6 minutes. The captain had come over the PA system 3 minutes ago with an announcement about an unspecified operational hold. The cabin around Clifford was thick with the low-grade collective irritation of expensive people being made to wait for reasons that had not been explained to them. Clifford exhaled through his nose. He had a dinner meeting in Chicago tomorrow evening at a restaurant that required reservations made 3 weeks in advance. He did not understand why it was apparently impossible for a major commercial airline to maintain a departure schedule. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. Force of habit, the reflex of a man whose professional survival depended on staying connected to the data streams that moved his portfolio. He opened his firm email. He scrolled through the afternoon's messages with the automatic efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. He stopped. An email from Meridian Capital's IT security department, sent at 2:47 p.m. while he had been in the priority boarding lane at Gate B-17. The subject line read, Fortis Data Shield Integration Team, Monday arrival, confirmation, and credential access protocols. The first line of the email read, as a reminder, the Fortis Data Shield on-site integration team will arrive at the Meridian Capital main office at 9 a.m. Monday for the commencement of Phase 2 of the SEC compliance encryption overhaul. Please ensure that all senior personnel with system access have completed the credential verification forms by end of business Friday. Clifford stared at the screen. He read the email again. He looked up from the phone, out the window of the aircraft, at the terminal building, at the jet bridge that was, as he watched, beginning to move. Fortis Data Shield. The name the boy had given. The name Clifford had heard and dismissed as the invented fiction of a cornered teenager trying to construct a plausible father. Fortis Data Shield. The cybersecurity firm that his own company's IT department was currently treating as the most important external vendor relationship Meridian Capital had. The firm that was arriving Monday morning to handle the encryption overhaul that the SEC had mandated under penalty of trading license suspension. The color left Clifford Ashby's face in a way that had nothing to do with the recycled air of the cabin. He looked at his phone. He looked at the moving jet bridge. He understood with the specific, comprehensive clarity that comes to people who have made a catastrophic error of judgment. At the precise moment the consequences of that error become visible, exactly what was about to happen. He was still holding the phone when the jet bridge locked into the aircraft door with a heavy metallic clang that resonated through the fuselage. Back at gate B-17, the mechanism of the jet bridge engaging produced a sound that carried clearly through the terminal windows into the departure lounge. Jordan was on his feet before his father said anything. They both turned toward the gate as Beverly Drummond, who had received the call from Douglas Whitfield's office 7 minutes ago and had spent those 7 minutes trying to locate a version of the past hour that reflected better on her judgment, stepped stiffly to the gate door. Claire Mosswood approached Nathan from his left. She introduced herself with the brisk efficiency of a professional who respects other people's time. "Mr. Ellis, Claire Mosswood, AP Wire. 6 minutes and 14 seconds of unedited footage. Interior first-class cabin. I have not transmitted it anywhere. Nothing goes out without Jordan's consent and your agreement." Nathan looked at her steadily. "What did you see?" "Everything. From the finger snap to the badge number request to the removal." She paused a half-second. "Your son was the only person in that cabin who behaved with integrity. That includes every adult present." Nathan nodded once. He looked at Jordan. "She can use it," Jordan said. Nathan looked back at Claire. "After we're back on the plane," he said. "Then your judgment." Claire stepped back. The gate door opened. Beverly Drummond stood at the podium with the rigid posture of someone who had made a decision she now had to execute regardless of its cost. Nathan put his hand on Jordan's back, and they walked to the gate together. They walked down the jet bridge. The cabin of Flight 112 was holding the particular suspended silence of a full aircraft that has been waiting longer than expected for information it has not received. The first-class passengers had been in their seats for nearly 30 minutes since pushback. Champagne had gone warm. Patience had thinned. The ambient murmur of collective expensive frustration ran from the forward bulkhead to the dividing curtain. The murmur stopped the moment Nathan and Jordan stepped through the forward door. It did not fade. It did not taper gradually in the way sounds taper when attention drifts away. It stopped instantly and completely the way sound stops when the nature of a room changes in a single moment. Pamela Greer was standing near the galley. She saw Beverly first. Then she saw Nathan. Then she saw Jordan, the boy in the gray hoodie, walking with his backpack on one shoulder and his sketchbook under his arm beside the tall man in the dark suit. She looked at the two of them together, the father and the son, the suit and the hoodie, and she understood with the complete, unambiguous clarity of someone who has just seen the exact shape of their own catastrophic error, what she had done, and precisely what it was going to cost her. Nathan did not look at her. He walked with Jordan down the aisle to row 2 and stopped. Clifford Ashby was in 2B. He had the laptop open on his tray table, the Fortis Data Shield email still on the screen, though he was not looking at it anymore. He was looking at Nathan with the Wall Street instinct of a man whose financial survival had always depended on his ability to read a room in under 3 seconds. He took in the suit, the watch, the posture, the absolute absence of any agitation in Nathan's face or body. He took in the quality of stillness that Nathan carried, and his algorithmic mind made the assessment instantly. This was not an upset parent. This was someone who had already won. Then Clifford looked at Jordan, the boy he had pointed at, the boy he had called a demographic, the boy he had watched walk out of this cabin 40 minutes ago with security officers flanking him. Standing in the aisle of the aircraft, looking at him with an expression that contained no anger, no triumph, no performance of any kind. Just the settled, clean, unafraid certainty of someone who had been right from the beginning and had simply waited for the room to arrive at the same conclusion. Clifford opened his mouth. Nathan spoke first, quietly, conversationally, the way a man speaks when he knows that the loudest thing in the room is not volume, but certainty. "Clifford Ashby," Nathan said, "Senior Partner, Meridian Capital High Frequency Trading Division." He let the name and the title settle. "My name is Nathan Ellis. I'm the founder and chief executive of Fortis Data Shield." A brief pause. "I believe you've already met my son." The champagne glass trembled in Clifford's hand. "Mr. Ellis," Clifford said, his voice working hard to maintain the register of a man who still had options. "I understand there may have been a serious misunderstanding today, and I want to assure you that my concerns were, Fortis Data Shield currently holds the encryption infrastructure contract for Meridian Capital's SEC compliance overhaul," Nathan said. Still quiet, still even. still completely without heat, which made it more serious than heat would have. The integration team is scheduled to arrive at your Manhattan office Monday morning. The contract your managing directors signed 8 months ago. The one that gives our firm administrative access to the security architecture underlying your entire algorithmic trading operation. He paused. Every contract Fortis Data Shield executes contains an ethics and conduct clause. I wrote it myself. It permits immediate termination of service without penalty or notice period if a client's senior personnel engage in discriminatory conduct on federal property directed at a minor. He paused again. I am invoking that clause now. The trembling in the champagne glass became visible to the passengers in the surrounding rows. Mr. Ellis, Clifford said. In the register he was reaching for the controlled professional register of a man managing a negotiation was no longer accessible to him. What came out instead was something closer to the voice of a man who has just understood the dimensions of the hole he is standing in. I made a very serious error today. I can see that with complete clarity. If there is any way to address this between us as professionals, I am prepared to do whatever is necessary. I apologize to you, and I apologize. He stopped. He looked at Jordan. He seemed to understand that the next word he said to the boy needed to be the truest thing he had said in the last hour. I apologize to you, he said. Jordan looked at Clifford Ashby for a moment. Dad, Jordan said. Quiet. Not a request. A declaration of intent. Nathan looked at his son. Jordan looked at Clifford. Not with anger. Not with the satisfaction of someone watching an enemy diminished. He looked at him with something more honest than either of those things. With the clear-eyed directness of someone who had decided that the truest thing he could offer this man was the truth itself. You looked at me, Jordan said, and you saw something that didn't belong here. I looked at you, and I saw someone who was afraid. He paused. I don't know what you're afraid of, but I know it has nothing to do with me. The first-class cabin of Transaero Flight 112 was so quiet that the low-frequency hum of the ventilation system, the constant ambient sound that normally disappeared below the threshold of conscious awareness, was plainly audible. Clifford Ashby, 58 years old, senior partner at Meridian Capital, 3 decades of credentialed authority and accumulated wealth assembled around him like armor, sat in his wide leather seat with his laptop open to an email that had explained everything and could not find a single word to put in the silence. Nathan let the silence be what it was. Then he turned to Beverly Drummond, who had been standing several feet behind them with the rigid stillness of a woman who had already accepted the shape of what was coming and was now simply waiting for it to arrive. Beverly, Nathan said, Mr. Ashby is no longer traveling with Transaero today. Please have him removed from the aircraft. Beverly straightened. She looked at Clifford with the expression of someone who had until 40 minutes ago been acting in deference to this man's preferences and who was now realigning that deference toward a different, more consequential authority. Mr. Ashby, Beverly said, you need to collect your belongings and exit the aircraft now. If you decline, I will contact Port Authority Police. Clifford Ashby did not argue. The man who had snapped his fingers at a flight attendant, who had pointed across an armrest at a child and used the word demographic like a judicial verdict, who had told that child with the breezy, unexamined confidence of someone who had never been wrong about his own power. That spaces like this were not built for people like him, that man was simply gone. What remained in seat 2B was something gray and quiet and very small. He reached up and opened the overhead bin. He took down his leather carry-on. He did not look at Jordan. He did not look at Nathan. He did not look at the passengers who had watched his entire performance from the finger snap to this moment and were now watching his exit with the expression of people revising in real time their understanding of how power actually works. He walked down the aisle. He walked the same aisle, past the same rows, past the same faces that had watched Jordan walk this direction 40 minutes ago with security officers on either side of him, through the same silence, under the same overhead bins, out the same door. The jet bridge received him. The terminal beyond it, in the professional life he had known for 3 decades, were already preparing to complete what Nathan Ellis had set in motion. Jordan watched him go. Then he turned and stepped into row 2. He put his backpack under the footrest. He sat down in seat 2A. He looked out the window at the October tarmac, the runway lights beginning to assert themselves against the darkening afternoon, and he exhaled one long, slow breath that contained in its entirety everything the last 2 hours had cost him. Nathan sat down in seat 2B. He said nothing for a moment. He sat beside his son and let the quiet be what it was. The particular quiet of two people who have been through something together and have arrived at last at the far side of it. The captain's voice came over the PA system with the professional calm of someone who understood that the situation had been resolved and had been given just enough information to confirm that, without enough information to fully understand what had actually happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the extended delay. The operational matter that required our return to the gate has been fully resolved. We are cleared for immediate departure. Our flight time to Chicago O'Hare will be approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience this evening. A new flight attendant appeared at row 2, young and clearly briefed, moving with the attentive efficiency of someone who understood exactly who they were serving. Mr. Ellis, she said, addressing father and son with equal formality and evident care. Can I get you anything before we push back? Jordan looked at his father. Nathan looked at his son. Just water, Nathan said. Thank you. The jet bridge retracted. The aircraft began to move. And in seat 3F, Claire Mosswood, connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi, opened the AP wire secure filing interface on her laptop and began to write the caption that would accompany 6 minutes and 14 seconds of footage that by the time Flight 112 landed in Chicago would already be remaking the landscape of several lives. Outside, JFK fell away behind them. The gray October sky opened up above the runway threshold. The engines built to full power with the specific gathering authority of something very large committing to motion. The nose lifted. Jordan Ellis pressed back into his seat as the ground fell away, and for the first time since he had walked down this jet bridge 4 hours ago, he felt the particular quality of lightness that arrives when something heavy has been put down. Not because the world had become fair. It had not. Not because everything that needed to happen had happened. It had not yet, not entirely. But because his father was beside him. Because the truth was in the air literally and otherwise. Because a storm had been gathering since a boy in a gray hoodie had asked a flight attendant for her badge number, and it was now at full power heading for shore. The filing went live at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Claire Mosswood did not sensationalize it. She did not craft a headline designed to generate the maximum number of clicks or frame the story in the breathless register of outraged journalism that converts genuine injustice into content to be consumed and discarded before the next news cycle. She was a journalist of the old school, shaped by 20 years of practice in the belief that the most powerful thing a reporter could do was step back and let the truth do what truth does when it is presented clearly, accurately, and without interference. Her AP wire caption read, "Video obtained exclusively by the Associated Press documents the removal of a 15-year-old passenger from a paid first-class seat aboard Transaero Flight 112 at John F. Kennedy International Airport on Tuesday evening. The minor was traveling alone on a valid ticket registered to a Platinum corporate account. The removal was initiated by a fellow passenger and carried out by airline staff. The passenger is identified as Clifford Ashby, senior partner at Meridian Capital, New York. Airline personnel have been identified. The minor's father, Nathan Ellis, chief executive of Fortis Data Shield, was present at the airport. The aircraft was recalled from the active taxi queue by direct order of Transaero's chief executive. No adjectives, no editorial commentary, no framing that told the reader what to feel. Just the facts arranged in the sequence they occurred with the footage running underneath them. The AP wire syndicated to 430 news outlets within the first 90 minutes. By midnight, every major television network had picked it up. By 1 in the morning, the footage was the dominant trending item across every significant social media platform operating in the country. By 2 a.m., the specific clip of Jordan Ellis standing at the gate podium asking Pamela Greer for her badge number. His voice level, his posture straight, his face carrying the focused composure of a 15-year-old who had decided in real time that documentation was the most powerful response available to him, had been viewed 11 million times. When the sun rose over the East Coast on Wednesday morning, the number was 23 million. The country had encountered things like this before. The algorithm knew this particular shape of story. Videos of cruelty in privileged spaces. Power used against people whose only offense was occupying a space that someone with more institutional armor had decided was not available to them. The country had seen these things and responded with the familiar burning arc of social media outrage, a few days of intense discourse, and then the gradual subsidence as the next thing arrived to claim the algorithm's attention. But this one did not follow that arc. And the reason it did not follow that arc was not the injustice, which was, as Claire's clinical reporting made clear, neither unusual nor surprising in the context of how these spaces had always functioned. The reason was Jordan himself, the badge number request, the straight back walking out of the cabin. The moment in the aisle when he stopped and turned and looked at Clifford Ashby until Clifford Ashby looked away first. The country watched that footage and recognized something it needed and did not have a category for. A 15-year-old boy who had been handed a situation specifically designed to break him and had responded with more precision, more grace, and more moral clarity than most adults could access on their best days. People shared it because they were angry. They kept watching it because they were moved. There is a difference between those two things, and the difference is what determines whether something lasts. 26 million views by Wednesday afternoon. In a corner office on the 50th floor of a midtown Manhattan tower, a man named Reginald Ford sat alone in the early gray light of Wednesday morning and watched the video 4 times. Reginald Ford was 71 years old. He had founded Meridian Capital 33 years ago with 2 partners, a second-hand desk in a shared office space in Lower Manhattan, and the specific kind of hunger that belongs to men from working-class families in Pittsburgh who were told throughout their childhood that certain rooms were not designed for people with their last name. He had decided at an age when most people are still accepting the terms offered to them that he would spend his life demonstrating the inadequacy of that assessment. He had built Meridian into what it was through 3 decades of disciplined work and the uncompromising application of a single principle, which he articulated in every firm-wide address and embedded in every performance review, and returned to whenever the firm faced a decision that might tempt it toward expedience over integrity. The principle was this: character is the only professional asset that cannot be manufactured, borrowed against, or recovered once it is gone. A reputation can be rebuilt. Revenue can be recovered. Character, once genuinely forfeited, is simply absent. He had watched the video 4 times. Then he had called an emergency board meeting for 7 a.m. The Meridian Capital boardroom was a room that communicated the firm's history through the deliberate weight of its furnishings. The long oak table, the photographs along the mahogany walls, 30 years of partnerships and milestones, and the formal portraits of people who had built something real. The floor-to-ceiling windows with their view of Midtown Manhattan that on clear mornings felt like a statement about what elevation looked like when it had been genuinely earned. This Wednesday morning, none of it felt like that. The room felt like what it was, a space where an accounting was about to be rendered. The video was paused on the main projection screen at the front of the room. It was frozen on the frame of Clifford Ashby's face, at the precise moment he raised his pointing finger toward Jordan Ellis for the first time. The view counter beside the video player read 19.1 million. That number was from 12 minutes ago. It was considerably higher now. Clifford sat at the far end of the table. He had not slept. The evidence was in the gray looseness of his face, the way his suit, normally impeccable, hung slightly wrong on him, in the way clothes hang on people who have spent the night inside a shrinking situation. He had brought his attorney, who sat beside him with a leather portfolio open and the careful, neutral expression of someone being paid to be present. The other partners and the firm's chief legal counsel sat along the opposite side of the table. No one had spoken to Clifford when he entered. No one had made eye contact. Reginald Ford entered last. He walked to the head of the table and stood there for a moment without sitting. He looked at the paused image on the projection screen, at Clifford's pointing finger, at the partial visible edge of Jordan's gray hoodie in the frame. Then he looked at Clifford, and Clifford looked back at him, and what moved between them in that exchange was the full accumulated weight of 30 years of professional association and the specific sadness of a man who had built something on a principle and was now watching someone he had trusted demonstrate in 6 minutes and 14 seconds of recorded footage how thoroughly he had failed to understand that principle. Reginald sat down. He did not open a folder. He did not consult notes. He looked at Clifford Ashby, and he spoke with the unhurried authority of a man who had already made every decision that needed to be made. I built this firm, Reginald said, on one principle. One, that what a man does when he believes no one is watching is the most accurate measure of what he actually is. Not what he does in the boardroom, not what he does in negotiations. What he does when he thinks the room contains only witnesses who will agree with him. He paused. You were on an airplane, Clifford. You thought you were surrounded by people who would look away. Some of them did, but not all of them. And more importantly, even if every single person in that cabin had looked away, what you did to that boy would still have been exactly what it was. Clifford's attorney shifted in his seat and opened his mouth. Reginald looked at him with a glance that closed the attorney's mouth without a word being exchanged. The board convened at 7 this morning, Reginald continued. The vote was unanimous. We are releasing a public statement in 20 minutes explicitly condemning your conduct and confirming your termination for gross misconduct. Your equity stake in the firm is being bought out at the penalty rate specified in Section 14 of your partnership agreement. Your access to all firm systems databases and communications was revoked at midnight last night. A measured pause. Security will escort you from this floor when we conclude. Clifford Ashby had spent the night constructing arguments. In the long, sleepless hours between the private charter back to New York and this morning's elevator ride to the 50th floor, he had assembled multiple versions of a defense, each built on the premise that context properly presented could reshape the meaning of the footage. That 6 minutes was not a sufficient sample to represent the full texture of a complex situation. That the response being proposed was disproportionate to the action that had generated it. He had constructed these arguments with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent 3 decades winning rooms with words. He did not make any of them, because somewhere in the 4th or 5th viewing of the footage on his laptop in the back of the charter plane, somewhere in the gray hours when exhaustion finally overrides the self-protective architecture of the ego, Clifford Ashby had looked at his own face on the screen and had been unable to find in the face looking back at him any version of himself he was prepared to defend. "I understand," he said. It was the first honest sentence he had spoken since the boarding lane at Gate B-17. It was also the last thing he said in the building that had contained his professional life for 22 years. He pushed his chair back from the table. He stood. He picked up his leather portfolio with the careful, contained movements of a man who has decided that the manner of his exit is the last thing he has any control over. He walked out of the boardroom, down the mahogany hallway, into the elevator, through the lobby, out through the glass doors of the building and into the thin November light of a Manhattan morning that continued as Manhattan mornings do without any acknowledgement of what had just ended. The door closed behind him. He did not go back. 3 miles south of the Meridian Capitol Tower on the 4th floor of Transaero's Regional Operations Center adjacent to the JFK Terminal Complex Wednesday morning was unfolding with the controlled urgency of an institution in full crisis management. Douglas Whitfield had flown in from Dallas the previous night. He was working on 3 hours of sleep in the specific high-alert clarity of a man who understood that the decisions made in the next 72 hours would determine whether the incident at Gate B-17 became a contained chapter or a defining catastrophe in Transaero's institutional history. The airline stock had opened down 3.5% on Wednesday morning. Civil rights organizations had issued formal statements before 9 a.m. 3 of Transaero's largest corporate accounts had sent holding emails indicating they were monitoring the situation. The social media team had stopped trying to manage the comment sections and was focused exclusively on not making anything worse. The disciplinary process moved with speed unusual for a large institution, driven partly by the unambiguous clarity of the video evidence and partly by the collective understanding shared by everyone in the building that every hour of delay was an hour of public narrative being written entirely without the company's participation. Beverly Drummond was terminated first. The decision required very little deliberation. Beverly had ordered the deployment of airport security personnel against a minor on grounds that the documentation available to her at that moment entirely contradicted. She had not acted in good faith on the basis of ambiguous evidence. She had acted in reflexive, immediate deference to the preferences of a wealthy passenger without conducting the basic verification that her position and her training and simple professional competence required. She was escorted from the building before 9 a.m. without severance. She did not contest the decision. She had watched the video. She knew what the video showed because she had been in it. Garrett Sykes was suspended for 90 days without pay. His reinstatement, if it occurred at all, would be contingent on completion of a comprehensive retraining program covering passenger civil rights anti-discrimination protocols under federal aviation regulations and the specific legal duties of gate personnel with respect to valid ticketing documentation. Garrett had briefly wept in the HR office. It was not a performance. It was the genuine distress of a man who had known in the exact moment he turned to the passenger behind Jordan and asked whether he needed assistance, that he was making a choice he did not have the courage to refuse. He had made the wrong choice. He had made it knowingly. And now he was living in the precise and inescapable aftermath of what knowing choices cost. The 90-day suspension was not at its core primarily punitive. Douglas Whitfield understood this and said it explicitly to the HR director. The point of the suspension was to give a man who had made a failure of courage enough time and enough structured reflection to decide whether he was willing to become a different kind of person when he returned. That was not something the airline could control or mandate. It was entirely Garrett Sykes' decision. The 90 days was simply the space in which that decision could be made. The hardest conversation of the morning was Pamela Greer. Pamela had been with TransAero for 14 years. She was by every objective professional metric exceptional at her work. Her personnel file contained commendations from passengers whose names appeared regularly in business publications. She had no formal complaints in 14 years of service. She had been assigned to the airline's most prestigious routes because she had demonstrably earned the assignment through sustained excellence. She sat in the regional director's office on Wednesday morning in the composed manner of someone who had prepared carefully for a difficult conversation. She had reviewed her decisions from the previous afternoon and had arrived at a framework in which each individual action could be described in the language of protocol, professional judgment, and operational responsibility. She was ready to present that framework. The regional director was a woman named Sandra Okafor. Sandra had joined TransAero 14 years ago through a junior management training program and had reached the regional director's chair through 2 decades of precisely the kind of steady, unglamorous, genuinely competent institutional work that organizations depend on and rarely celebrate properly. She listened to Pamela's account without expression and without interruption. Then Sandra turned her laptop around so that the screen faced Pamela. She pressed play. Pamela watched herself on the screen. She watched her own hand reach across and take the paper ticket from Jordan without looking at the boarding pass his phone had already displayed and the system had already confirmed. She watched her own face in the moment she turned from Clifford Ashby toward Jordan, and she saw for the first time from the outside the precise instant of recalibration that had happened below the level of her conscious decision-making. She had believed that recalibration was invisible. The camera disagreed. She watched herself say, "Where did you obtain this?" in the voice she had believed was professionally neutral, and she heard through the objective instrument of the recording that it was something other than neutral. She watched the moment Jordan asked for her badge number. She watched her own face in that moment. The blink, the fractional stillness, the brief visible shock that preceded the reassembly of the professional mask. And she saw clearly, and without the protection of the framework she had constructed, what that shock was actually revealing. Not surprise at the audacity of the request. Something underneath the surprise. A recognition, however briefly visible and however quickly buried, that the boy asking the question had identified something real. Sandra stopped the video. The office was very quiet. "There is no protocol," Sandra said, "that required you to demand a paper ticket from a passenger whose digital boarding pass had already been scanned by the gate agent and confirmed as valid by the airline's own system." She paused. "There is no protocol that describes what you did as anything other than a decision made on the basis of something other than ticketing data. You did not see a passenger with a confirmed seat assignment in a cabin you were responsible for. You saw what Mr. Ashby wanted you to see, and you decided that his version of the occupant of that seat was more credible than your airline's own booking records." Pamela looked at the paused video on the screen, at her own face. The framework she had prepared did not emerge. She understood, looking at herself in the frozen frame, that it would not hold. Not primarily because Sandra would dismantle it, though Sandra would, but because Pamela herself, looking at her own face in the moment she turned from Clifford Ashby's pointing finger to Jordan Ellis's gray hoodie, could no longer construct an account of her own motivations that she was prepared to defend. "You are terminated effective today," Sandra said. "The airline will issue a full public statement this afternoon." Pamela picked up her bag. She stood. She walked out of the regional director's office through the operations center into the corridor of Terminal 4. She walked the route she had walked thousands of times in 14 years. Past the crew scheduling board, past the operations monitors, past the staff break room with its bulletin board of shift schedules and safety reminders. She walked past Gate B-17. The gate was fully operational. The departure board showed a mid-morning service to Denver. A full boarding line was moving through the priority lane with the ordinary, unremarkable efficiency of a process working as it was designed to work. A gate agent scanned a phone. The machine produced its confirmation tone. A boarding stub was printed. A thank you was exchanged. A person walked down the jet bridge to a seat they had every right to occupy. The whole small, ordinary, decent ritual of it. Pamela stood at the edge of the departure lounge and watched it for a moment. Then she walked out of Terminal 4 for the last time. In a hotel room 2 miles from O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, Nathan Ellis had been awake since 5:30. He was at the small desk near the window with his laptop open, working through the morning's accumulated communications with the systematic efficiency of a man who runs a company that does not pause for personal crises regardless of the weight they carry. The notifications from the overnight media coverage he had set aside in a separate folder. He would address them, but not until Jordan was awake and they had talked. He was not going to let the public version of this story land on his son before they had spoken. Jordan was asleep in the adjacent bed. He had fallen asleep somewhere over Indiana over the dark, flat immensity of the country center, in the space between the receding adrenaline of the afternoon and the quiet warmth of motion towards something familiar. He slept deeply and without visible disturbance, the sleep of someone who had told the truth in a situation that had been designed to prevent it, and who had nothing as a result left to hide from. Nathan looked at his son sleeping and thought, as he did in these unguarded early morning moments more often than he allowed himself to think about at other times, about the specific and unreducible weight of raising a child in a country that would not reliably protect him. The particular calculation that runs beneath the surface of every decision a black father makes about how to prepare a black son for a world that will make assessments about him before he speaks. You teach your child excellence and composure and precision, not because those qualities will guarantee his safety, because the honest and devastating truth is that nothing guarantees his safety, but because those qualities belong to him. They are his. They cannot be taken from him by anyone who looks at him and decides they already know what he is. He thought about Jordan at the podium, the badge number request, the formal documentation demand at the gate, the moment in the aisle. He thought about these things, and he thought about the fact that he had never done any of them at 15. He was not certain, being rigorously honest with himself in the early morning light, that he had done them with that degree of clarity at 25. Jordan stirred. He opened his eyes and looked at the hotel room ceiling for a moment, orienting himself. Then he turned his head and saw his father at the desk. "Morning," Jordan said. "Morning," Nathan said. "How do you feel?" Jordan considered the question with the seriousness he gave most questions worth asking. "Okay," he said. "Tired, but okay." Nathan closed the laptop. He turned his chair to face his son. "I need to tell you what's happened overnight," he said. "Claire's story went out on the wire at midnight. As of an hour ago, 23 million people have watched the video. Clifford Ashby was terminated from Meridian Capital this morning. Beverly Drummond and Pamela Greer have been dismissed from TransAero. Garrett Sykes has been suspended." He paused. "Your name is in every major paper in the country." Jordan sat up slowly, pulling his knees toward his chest, and looked out the window at Chicago in late October. The sky was the specific pale blue of a Midwestern morning, after the weather has clarified, the kind of blue that looks like the first day of something rather than the continuation of anything. The city pressed out to the horizon below it, indifferent and enormous. "It feels strange," Jordan said, "being known for getting kicked off a plane." "You're not known for getting kicked off," Nathan said. "You're known for what you did after they kicked you off. Those are very different things." Jordan looked at his father. "The badge number thing," he said. "That wasn't calculation. I wasn't thinking about strategy or evidence. I just needed her name because I knew I was going to need to tell someone exactly what happened, and I needed to be accurate." Nathan was quiet for a moment. A small, private smile moved across his face, the smile of a man recognizing something he had helped build without knowing how fully it had taken. That, Nathan said, is exactly what good strategy looks like when it's working correctly, when it's not performance, when it's simply the way a person thinks. Jordan reached down beside the bed and picked up the sketchbook. He opened it to the drawing he had started in the departure lounge at Gate B-17 the afternoon before. Clifford Ashby's face rendered honestly from memory. The jaw, the brow, the expression in the moment before the eyes cut away. He looked at it. "What happens to him now?" Jordan asked. "His firm terminated him this morning," Nathan said. "The press release is already public. At 58, with this on the record, his career in finance is effectively finished. The people who manage the money he managed don't recover from this kind of visibility at this stage. The exposure compounds everything. Jordan looked at the drawing, at the lines of the face, at the expression he had drawn honestly without cruelty, trying to capture the real thing rather than the convenient version. "I don't feel the way I thought I would," Jordan said quietly. Nathan looked at his son for a long time. "Tell me," Nathan said. "I thought I'd feel satisfied," Jordan said. "I thought watching all of that happen would feel like something, but it just feels correct. Like an equation that balanced. Not good, just correct." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's the right way to feel," he said. "Justice is supposed to feel correct. When it feels good, that's usually about something else. Usually about our own need to be vindicated rather than about what's actually right. The fact that you can tell the difference between those two things, Jordan, at 15 is not a small thing." Jordan set the sketchbook down on his knee. He turned to a fresh page. He picked up his pencil and held it above the blank paper without touching it, the way he sometimes did when the image he needed hadn't fully assembled itself yet. "There's something else," Nathan said. Jordan looked up. Nathan turned his laptop toward his son. On the screen was an email from Douglas Whitfield. 6 paragraphs of the specific, careful language that results when legal teams review every word before it is sent. Formal apologies, commitments to systemic review, an offer of financial settlement, an offer of complimentary first-class travel. "I responded to this before you woke up," Nathan said. "What did you say?" "I declined the money and the travel." Nathan paused. "I asked for something else." Jordan waited. "Fortis Data Shield is going to build a bias detection protocol for Trans-Aero's gate operations infrastructure," Nathan said. "It will be integrated into the ticketing verification system at every gate the airline operates. The protocol flags any attempt by gate or cabin personnel to override a confirmed valid ticket without secondary authorization from the airline's corporate compliance office. The override cannot be completed by a single employee acting on their own judgment. It requires independent verification from a second level of the system that the employee cannot access directly." He paused. "The algorithm does not care what the passenger looks like. It does not care what a fellow passenger thinks. It only cares whether the ticket is valid." Jordan absorbed this. "We're doing it for free," Nathan continued, "as a condition of renewing our existing infrastructure contract. And as a condition of that renewal, Trans-Aero will mandate implementation across all 23 domestic hubs they operate within 12 months. Not just JFK. "Denver," Jordan said. "Dallas, Atlanta. LAX, O'Hare, all of them." Jordan looked at his father. "You built a weapon," he said. "I built a shield," Nathan said. "There is a meaningful difference." Jordan looked back at the blank page in the sketchbook. He set the tip of the pencil against the paper. He began to draw without yet knowing what he was drawing, which was how his best drawings had always started, by letting the pencil find what the mind hadn't fully formed yet. They sat together in the hotel room while Chicago's October light moved across the window glass, and for a while neither of them spoke, and the silence between them was the comfortable, inhabited silence of two people who have been through something significant together and have reached the far side of it and understand without needing to say it that they are both changed by it, and that the change is something they will carry forward rather than set down. Nathan's phone buzzed on the desk. He looked at it without picking it up. A message from Claire Mosswood. "AP has received inquiries from 4 Senate offices requesting formal comment on the incident for aviation civil rights hearings scheduled for next month. Your son's name is being mentioned in connection with proposed amendments to the Air Passenger Bill of Rights. Call when you can." Nathan set the phone back on the desk without responding. That was for later. For now there was this: the hotel room, the Chicago light, the pencil moving across the page. After a while, Jordan held up the sketchbook. He had drawn the interior of the first-class cabin of Flight 112. Not the drama of it, not the pointing finger, or the security officers in their yellow vests, or the rigid posture of Beverly Drummond reading her verdict. He had drawn the quiet version of the space. 2 seats, 2A and 2B side by side, the oval window between them showing a suggestion of sky. The seats were empty. They were drawn with the precise, attentive care that Jordan gave to things that mattered to him. The proportions were exact. The light from the window fell across the leather in a way that was technically accurate and also somehow more than that. It was a beautiful drawing. It was also the way good drawings always are: a statement. Two seats, the same cabin, the same window, and the same sky visible through it. Available as they had always been, available as they should always be available to anyone holding a valid ticket. Nathan looked at the drawing for a long time. "You're going to be all right, Jordan," he said finally. Not as reassurance, not as comfort, as an observation stated by a man who has confirmed something and is now simply reporting his finding. Jordan lowered the sketchbook. He looked out the window at his father's city, the city where Nathan Ellis had worked 3 jobs and written code in a freezing apartment and refused across years of refusal to accept the terms the world had initially offered him. "I know," Jordan said. He looked at the drawing in his lap for a moment. Then he looked up. "Dad," he said, "I want to build something when I'm older. I don't know exactly what it is yet. Maybe law, maybe something closer to what you do, but something that helps people who don't have what we have, who end up in that situation at gate B17 and don't have a father who can call the CEO." He paused. "Something that means the system protects them whether or not their father happens to know the right phone number." Nathan looked at his son for a long time, the full, unhurried attention that had always been one of the most important things he gave his son. Outside the window, Chicago spread itself out under the pale October sky, indifferent and vast, and full of the 10,000 separate urgencies that cities run, on the same way airports run on them, the same way the whole grinding machine of the world runs on them, full of people who are in the right seat or the wrong seat, or someone else's idea of the wrong seat, moving through their days with the ordinary, unremarked courage of people who have learned that the world is imperfect and have decided to keep moving through it anyway, and to build things where they can that make it incrementally less so. Nathan looked at his son. His son looked back at him. Between them on the small hotel desk sat an open laptop, an unanswered phone, and a sketchbook full of honest portraits of people who had revealed themselves completely without intending to. Nathan said, "That's exactly how I started.